secrets of his various creations, revealing just a little more each year. By 1935, on his 79th birthday, Tesla, although exceedingly gaunt, was still exuberant and expected to live past 110. His mind ever evolving, the sorcerer utilized this occasion to lay out in considerable detail the various particulars of a number of his more exotic creations. With movie cameras rolling and the inventor treating the press, about 30 in number, to a gourmet's luncheon, Mr. Tesla sat at the head of the table. Eating little more than bread and warm milk, which he heated up in a chafing dish at the table, the wizard talked while the reporters feasted. Inventor 81 talks of key to interstellar transmission and tube to produce radium copiously and cheaply. Reports of discoveries by which it will be possible to communicate with the planets and to produce radium in unlimited quantities for $1 a pound were announced by Dr. Nikola Tesla yesterday on his 81st birthday, at which he was honored with high orders from the Yugoslav and Czechoslovak governments. I am expecting to put before the Institute of France an accurate description of the devices with data and calculations, and claim the Pierre Gutzmann Prize of 100,000 francs for means of communication with other worlds, feeling perfectly sure that it will be awarded to me. The money, of course, is a trifling consideration, but for the great historical honor of being the first to achieve this miracle, I would be almost willing to give my life. I am just as sure that the prize will be awarded to me as if I already had it in my pocket. They have got to do it. It means it will be possible to convey several thousand units of horsepower to other planets, regardless of the distance. This discovery of mine will be remembered when everything else I have done is covered with dust. In discussing this invention, one runs into murky waters, for it appears that Tesla tied the concept of the radium-producing tube to the interplanetary communicator. These, however, may be two unrelated creations. Another problem was that the inventor was also discussing at this time the idea of capturing cosmic rays that travel at velocities 50 times greater than that of light. If this invention utilized cosmic rays, it would imply that Tesla planned to transcend the speed of light and communicate with other stars. In reading the text carefully, it appears that Tesla does not mention other stars, but rather the planets, which are relatively close to the Earth. Furthermore, he doesn't really discuss communicating with extraterrestrials so much as transmitting energy. It is known that as early as 1918, while working with Comanchito's son Julian, the inventor was bouncing laser-like pulses off the moon and testing some type of scope. Therefore, it is possible that he was working on more than one device to send energy into outer space. Verification for Tesla that there existed particles that traveled faster than the speed of light were purportedly discovered in the late 1890s, when he invented a device to capture radiant energy. The machine, patented on November 5, 1901, comprised in essence an insulated plate resembling a fly swatter made out of the best quality of mica as dielectric. This was attached to a condenser. Stemming from his work with radiant energy, X-rays and Leonard tubes, the device could also capture what he called cosmic rays. I made some progress in solving the mystery until in 1899 I obtained mathematical and experimental proofs that the sun and other heavenly bodies similarly conditioned emit rays of great energy which consist of inconceivably small particles animated by velocities vastly exceeding that of light. So great is the penetrative power of these rays that they can traverse thousands of miles of solid matter with but slight diminution of velocity. In passing through space, which is filled with cosmic dust, they generate a secondary radiation of constant intensity day or night, and pouring upon the earth equally from all directions. Since Victor Hess's discovery in 1911 and Robert Millikan's confirmation, there have been many scientists who have measured cosmic rays. We now know that emitted uncharged elementary particles, known as neutrinos, possess the penetrative powers suggested by Tesla, but no researcher, to my knowledge, has discovered rays that transcend the speed of light. This supposed finding of Tesla also violated relativity. Tesla was insistent that such particles did exist. He saw them as a source which could be converted into electrical power. During the summer of 1932, he told Jack O'Neill that he had harnessed the cosmic rays and caused them to operate a motive device. The attractive features of the cosmic rays is their constancy. They shower down on us through the whole 24 hours, and if a plant is developed to use their power, it will not require devices for storing energy, as would be necessary with devices using wind, tide, or sunlight. When pressed for more details, Tesla revealed that he would tell O'Neill, in a general way, their modus operandi. The cosmic rays ionize the air, setting free many charges, ions and electrons. These charges are captured in a condenser, which is made to discharge through the circuit of the motor. Tesla also told O'Neill that he had hopes of building such a motor on a large scale. Free energy? As the years rolled on, it became a challenge for reporters to wrestle more details about each invention from the wizened prestidigitator, since Tesla continued to maintain his perpetual reticence about revealing particulars. Concerning the cosmic ray accumulator, the reporters were able collectively to pry from the inventor the following. My power generator will be of the simplest kind, just a big mass of steel, copper, and aluminum, comprising a stationary and rotating part, peculiarly assembled. Such a source of power obtainable everywhere will solve many problems with which the human race is confronted. The machinery for harnessing it would last more than 5,000 years. Cosmic rays, he asserted, are produced by the force of electrostatic repulsion. They consist of powerfully charged positive particles which come to us from the Sun and other suns in the universe. He determined, after experimentation, that the Sun is charged with an electrical potential of approximately 215 billion volts. Owing to its immense charge, the Sun imparts to minute positively electrified particles prodigious velocities which are governed only by the ratio between the quantity of free electricity carried by the particles and their mass, some attaining a speed exceeding 50 times that of light. At great altitudes, the intensity of the rays is more than 10,000% greater than at sea level. The energy of the cosmic radiations impinging upon the Earth from all sides is stupendous, such that if all of it were converted into heat, the globe would quickly be melted and volatilized. Rising air currents partially neutralize their intensity. Those who are still doubting that our Sun emits powerful cosmic rays evidently overlook that the solar disk, in whatever position it may be in the heavens, cuts off the radiations from beyond, replacing them by its own. Coupled with his view that all bodies in the universe obtain their energy from external sources, and possibly influenced by Walter Russell, an artist, philosopher, and longtime friend of Tesla's, who hypothesized that the periodic table of elements was constructed in a hierarchical spiral of octaves, Tesla was led to the inescapable conclusion that such bodies as the Sun are taking on mass much more rapidly than they are dissipating it by the dissipation of energy in heat and light. Similarly, radioactive decay was not caused by the disintegration of the nucleus of the atom. Rather, it was a secondary effect of external rays and twofold, one part coming from the energy stored, the other from that continuously supplied. In other words, radioactive material was, to Tesla, apparently a kind of conduit for the ever-present primary substance, akasha, which was being absorbed in such a way as to cause the emission of the radioactive material. These Tesla offerings would appear as evidence of a great mind gone astray, for the various discoveries and suggestions inherent in Tesla's theory violate not only such accepted theories as relativity and quantum physics, but also on the surface, common sense. The idea that the inventor could construct a simple device made up basically of a receiving plate and a condenser to provide electricity to run motors from cosmic rays harks the listener back to the inane days of the Keeley motor and the obtuse concepts of perpetual motion and free energy. Yet underneath the veneer of the theory is an exciting notion that the sun is somehow absorbing energy from the universe, and that there does exist some form of it which transcends the limiting factor of the speed of light. Called by other researchers tachyons, i.e. particles that travel faster than the speed of light, and linked to other such concepts as black holes, wormholes, string theory, non-locality, the implicate order, hyperspace, gravitons, and Mach's principle, Tesla's theories, when viewed within the matrix of the bizarre new physics, may not be so far out. Another of Tesla's discoveries involved the transmission of mechanical energy to distant places. By strategically placing one of his mechanical oscillators on, for example, solid bedrock, a mechanical impulse could be sent into the ground to accomplish at least 4 practical possibilities. It would give the world a new means of unfailing communication. It would provide a new safe means for guiding ships at sea into port, furnish a kind of divining rod for locating ore deposits, and finally, it would provide scientists with a means for laying bare the physical conditions of the Earth. The essential principle behind this invention is, of course, used today in sonar for ships and by geophysicists in studying the interior of the Earth, mapping fault lines, studying the core, and so on. Tesla at 78 bears new death beam. Dr. Tesla has perfected a method and apparatus which will send concentrated beams of particles through the free air of such tremendous energy that they will bring down a fleet of 10,000 enemy airplanes at a distance of 250 miles from a defending nation's border, and will cause armies of millions to drop dead in their tracks. Tesla's discovery of a death ray stems all the way back to his work in the early 1890s with his creation of a button lamp that would bounce electrons off a central filament made of almost any substance, e.g. carbon, diamonds, zirconia, rubies, onto the interior of a self-reflective bulb and then bounce back to the source. This device would not only produce an extraordinary brilliant light, it would also vaporize the button. As stated previously, it was only a short step from this machine to the invention of the ruby laser. For instance, if there was a scratch or imperfection in the coating of the glass, the energy would stream out through this opening in laser-like fashion. In the late 1890s, Tesla was bombarding targets with X-rays at distances in excess of 40 feet, and by 1915 he had announced in the New York Times a type of electronic defensive shield which today corresponds to what has been called SDI, or Strategic Defense Initiative. Harry Grindle Matthews. During World War I, another Teslarian, Harry Grindle Matthews, was provided with £25,000 by the British government for the creation of a searchlight beam which he said could control aircraft. A wireless electrician and veteran of the British Army, wounded at the turn of the century during the Boer War, Grindle Matthews eventually refined this invention and changed it into a diabolical ray. This new electronic beam, he said, could not only destroy zeppelins and airplanes, but also immobilize marching armies and nautical fleets. Although he would not divulge the specifics of his creation, he made no secret of his admiration for Tesla, whose technologies had inspired its groundwork. In July 1924, Grindle Matthews traveled to America to see an eye specialist. He probably met with Hugo Gernsback at that time and might also have visited Tesla. Staying at the Hotel Vanderbilt, the British inventor was interviewed by a number of the local dailies. "Let me recall to you the air attacks on London during the World War. Searchlights picked up the German raiders and illuminated them while guns fired, hitting some but more often missing them. But suppose instead of a searchlight you directed my ray. So soon as it touches the plane, this bursts into flame and crashes to the earth." Grindle Matthews was also convinced that the Germans had such a ray. They were using a high-frequency current of 200 kilowatts, which as of yet they were unable to control. Working with the French government in Lyon and performing successful tests before members of the British War Office, Grindle Matthews instituted destructive effects at distances of 60 feet, but was hoping to extend the force to a radius of 6 or 7 miles. Asked for specifics, he said that his device utilized 2 beams, one as a carrier ray and the other as the destructive current. The first beam would constitute a low frequency and would be projected through a lens. The second, of a higher frequency, would increase conductivity so that destructive power would be more easily transmitted. The motor of an airplane, for instance, could be the contact point at which the paralyzing ray would do its handiwork. He admitted, however, that if the object were grounded, it would be protected against such a force. Hugo Gernsback, along with Dr. W. Severinghaus, a physicist from Columbia University, tried unsuccessfully to duplicate the effects using heat beams, X-rays, and ultraviolet rays. Doubting Grindle-Matthews' claims, Gernsback nevertheless featured the diabolical ray with characteristic Frank Paulian panache on the cover of his magazine and with a series of exposés. Leaders from other countries were less critical than Gernsback, and many proclaimed that their scientists also had such diabolical rays. Herr Wöhler, a member of the German Reichstag, announced that 3 German scientists have perfected apparatus that can bring down airplanes, halt tanks, and spread a curtain of death like gas clouds of the recent war. Not to be outdone, Leon Trotsky stated that the Soviets had also invented such a device. Warning all nations, Trotsky proclaimed, "I know the potency of Gramachikov's ray, so let Russia alone." This theme of all-powerful, efficient weaponry reappeared during the 1930s as the seeds of World War II were sown. At this time, Tesla began to reveal more and more about his own diabolical ray as he criticized the Grindle-Matthews scheme. "It is impossible to develop such a ray," Dr. Tesla says. "I worked on that idea for many years before my ignorance was dispelled, and I became convinced that it could not be realized. This new beam of mine consists of minute bullets moving at a terrific speed, and any amount of power desired can be transmitted by them. The whole plant is just a gun, but one which is incomparably superior to the present." The inventor further claimed that the new weapon, which was to be used for defense only, comprised 4 new inventions. 1. An apparatus for producing the rays. 2. A process for producing immense electrical power. 3. A method for amplifying the power. And 4. A tremendous electrical repelling force. Working in 2 undisclosed locations, including a secret laboratory under the 59th Street Bridge near 2nd Avenue, Tesla perfected his particle beam weapon as he conspired with unabashed anarchist and architect Titus de Bobula to design the all-purpose power plant that could generate high voltages or capture cosmic rays and convert them into his defensive electronic shield. Believing that entire countries could be protected by such plants, the inventor clandestinely approached the war departments of each of the Allies with his scheme. 45. Living on Credit, 1925 to 1940. If you mean the man who really invented, in other words, originated and discovered, not merely improved what had already been invented by others, then without a shade of doubt, Nikola Tesla is the world's greatest inventor, not only at present, but in all history. Hugo Gernsback. Tesla was leading a double life in his later years, one as the elegant author of the electrical power system and father of the wireless, and another, more labyrinth existence as the quintessential mad scientist, whose ultimate creations would rule not only the Earth, but other worlds as well. In 1935, with the help of newsreel photographers, Tesla designed and produced an electrified extravaganza which he offered to Paramount Pictures. Paramount said the film came out unusually good, both in respect to pictorial and sound effects, he told George Scherf, but they feel that the subject was too technical. Nevertheless, Teslaic themes continue to make their way into the mass consciousness. The most important movie person to implement the inventor's wizardry was revolutionary movie producer Carl Laemmle and his special effects expert Kenneth Strickfaden. Together, they unleashed one of Tesla's unforgettable coils in the Boris Karloff classic Frankenstein. Strickfaden also resurrected the same paraphernalia 40 years later when Mel Brooks recreated the set for the spoof Young Frankenstein. Tesla was partial to Laemmle, whom he referred to as a genius, because Laemmle too successfully fought the powerful Edison clique a generation earlier, when Edison held a monopoly on key movie-making patents and would not allow competitors to use them. Routing his product through Europe, Laemmle was able to withstand more than 200 legal actions against him to create Universal Pictures and thereby defeat Edison. Hugo Gernsback, of course, also continued to espouse Teslaic motifs in science wonder stories, with such fresh galactic escapades as The Mightiest Machine, Interplanetary Bridges, and A City on Neptune. Other apostles, such as John Hayes Hammond Jr. and Edwin Armstrong, were riding out the Great Depression living like kings. Hammond's castle throughout the 1930s became a haven for Hollywood stars, corporate giants, and virtuosos. The retreat also doubled as a top-secret military think tank. As Tesla continued to work at his hideaway by the 59th Street Bridge, Edwin Armstrong continued to engage in a never-ending court battle with Leader Forrest over the invention of the heterodyne. Holding 80,000 shares of RCA stock, Armstrong was powerful enough to ride out the litigation as he continued to design a variety of new patents. Starting up his own radio station, Armstrong unveiled his newest invention, FM radio, a novel system which reduced such problems as static caused by ground interference so often encountered with AM. Little did Armstrong know that the litigation caused by this latest creation would make the De Forest trial seem like a kindergarten spat. Getting on in years, Tesla decided to hire a few Western Union boys to feed the pigeons for him. Dressed in their official caps and snappy uniforms, the lads could be seen like clockwork at 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. at 3 different locations around the city, in front of the New York Public Library, in Bryant Park at the library's rear, and at St. Patrick's Cathedral. The inventor had constructed special wooden cages, complete with a bird bath, for taking care of wounded as well as healthy feathered friends, and he befriended other dove fanciers to whom he could deliver the birds. In 1925, Tesla's office was moved from 8 West 40th Street, near the New York Public Library, to fashionable quarters at 350 Madison Avenue. His secretaries, Dorothy Skerritt and Muriel Arbus, during the later years, shared duties with Slavic professor Paul Radosevelyevich from New York University, who edited Tesla's articles and screened incoming visitors. By 1928, however, the upkeep on the office had become too burdensome, and Tesla closed it for good. All of his holdings, consisting of 30 trunks, including his priceless correspondence, theoretical papers, and prototype inventions, were carted to the basement of the Hotel Pennsylvania, and that's where they remained until November the 21st, 1934, when he transferred them to the Manhattan Storage Warehouse located at 52nd Street and 7th Avenue. A contented member of the cognoscenti who had lived a life full of triumph was merely the persona, for underneath the appearance Tesla was often bitter, seeking an essentially solitary existence, displacing his anger in editorials that lashed out at Edison and Marconi, and on unfortunate hotel managers who had to contend with the thought of throwing the Grand Master out on his coattails for not paying his rent. In 1930, Tesla was escorted out of the Hotel Pennsylvania after residents complained about the interminable droppings from his flying rats, and because he was $2,000 behind in his rent. As B.A. Berendt quietly reimbursed the hotel to the best of his abilities, the inventor hired a crew to cart his beloved avian companions to George Scherf's home north of the city. Escaping their confinement, the pigeons returned to Manhattan just in time to move in with Tesla at his new abode, the Hotel Governor Clinton. Working on a variety of new fronts, Tesla entered a furtive realm which would put him in touch with a series of nefarious agents and heads of many governments. Naturally, he required funds, for he began to lag behind yet again in his rent. When he stopped by Hugo Gernsback's office for another $20, the science fiction editor showed Tesla an article on Westinghouse's new radio machinery. Realizing that this company was essentially pirating his wireless patents, Tesla strode into their offices and demanded royalty payments. He met with Victor Beam, assistant to the vice president. "It would be painful to me to resort to legal proceedings against a great corporation whose business is largely founded on my inventions," the inventor stated matter-of-factly, "and I trust that you will recognize the advantage of an amicable understanding." "Which statement do you claim to be an infringement?" Beam replied, feigning naivety.
Statement? Tesla shot back. Surely you must admit that my claim is too palpably evident to be denied.
Beam inquired as to the price of purchasing Tesla's wireless patent number 1,119,732, but it was really a stall tactic, as no genuine offer was made. In exasperation, Tesla went home to draft a technical letter spelling out each and every infringement of his fundamental work, and concluded, "We, Charles Scott and Tesla, have offered this revolutionary invention repeatedly, virtually on your own terms, and you did not want it. You have preferred to take it by force. You have robbed me of the credit that is due and injured me seriously in business. Instead of showing a willingness to adjust the matter in an equitable way, you say you want to fight. You may think you can secure an advantage by such matters, but we doubt it, and certainly they will not meet with public approval when all the facts are published." One of the problems Tesla had to deal with was the continuing legacy of resentment toward him by some members of the corporation. Unfortunately, one of the key antagonists was Andrew W. Robertson, a Westinghouse official who would soon become chairman of the company. Just a few years later, while Tesla was still alive, Robertson came to write a small treatise on the AC polyphase system for the 1939 World's Fair. In it, he neatly sidestepped any clear mention of Tesla's role in the development of the system, suggesting rather that William Stanley was the inventor. Robertson even had the audacity to write the following. "In George Westinghouse's time, an inventor was recognized as owner of his ideas and was given a patent to protect him in that ownership. Now we are told that patents are evil monopolies used to prevent people from getting the full benefits of an individual's work. If we are thinking clearly, we must draw the conclusion that these signs all point to a common hostility against the great inventor. If this hostility continues, it cannot but result in an environment certain to interfere with the growth and development of individual research and inventiveness." Here is a classic case of the Freudian defense mechanism known as projection, whereby one's real feelings are attributed to others. Robertson suggests that the common people resent the great inventor, when in fact it is really he who harbors this resentment. Tesla had first offered his wireless patents to the company in the early 1920s. A long time elapsed before the issue was resolved. As Tesla continued to make headlines for his invention of a diabolical ray, he also was becoming more and more adept at slipping past the manager of the Governor Clinton. If he had to wait for Westinghouse to come through, so would the hotel. Tesla was now working with the notorious architect and arms merchant Titus de Bobula, whose offices were located at 10 East 43rd Street. De Bobula was hired to design the tower, power plant, and housing for the inventor's impenetrable shield between nations. "We can project destructive energy in thread-like beams as far as a telescope can discern an object," said the 78-year-old inventor. "Dr. Tesla's death ray can annihilate an army 200 miles away. It can penetrate all but the thickest armor plate, and a country's whole frontier can be protected with plants producing these beams every 200 miles. Dr. Tesla concluded, "The plane is thus absolutely eliminated as a weapon. It is confined to commerce." Born in 1878 in Hungary, with ties to Tesla probably through the Pushkash brothers, de Bobulus had emigrated to the United States during the gay 90s. At that time, Tesla took the youth under his protection and aided him in obtaining passage for a boat trip back to his homeland. Short and stocky in stature, with a brush moustache and ruddy complexion, de Bobula returned to the States a few years later to study architecture. Having borrowed the money from Tesla ostensibly because he needed medical help in Budapest, de Bobula had actually returned home to help his father out in his moving business, and because he wanted to complete other studies at the local polytechnic. Never reimbursing the inventor for his aid and having lied about his real intentions, de Bobula apologized and appealed for funds once more in 1901. Writing from Marietta, Ohio, where he was attempting to design a church and school for a parish, he requested $70 or $80. Perhaps in lieu of repayment, the new architect offered to draw up plans for the laboratory at Wardenclyffe, but this assignment had already been undertaken by Stanford White. At about 1908, de Borbula moved to Pittsburgh, where he met and married Urana Mock, niece of Bethlehem steel czar Charles Schwab. Shortly thereafter, he designed and built Schwab's new mansion. He also secured loans from the steel magnate to finance a series of real estate ventures. By 1910, de Borbula was back in New York, earning his way by designing churches and constructing large apartment buildings in Manhattan and the Bronx. Playing fast and loose with Schwab's capital, de Borbula returned to Ohio, where he crossed the border into West Virginia and Kentucky to purchase 11,000 acres. Now well connected, the Hungarian offered to set up a syndicate of wealthy English steelmen to help refinance Wardenclyffe, promising to raise £1 million, without going to very much trouble, providing, of course, that we could demonstrate things to them satisfactorily. But Tesla declined the offer and resolved to fight my own battles. Known as a racketeer, having never paid taxes on the land deal, de Borbula also reneged on a series of other loans. Naturally, Schwab became angry, particularly because he had lent de Borbula additional monies to keep him out of debtor's prison. Paradoxically, de Borbula became interested in workers' rights at this time and in the growing anarchist movement. Seen as a gold digger and bully by Schwab, the wealthy financier was reported to have said that "Bob is dishonest, and I would give $1 million if he would jump out of this window right now." This event unleashed a powder keg of animosity between the two, de Borbula suing Schwab for $100,000 for defamation of character, Schwab severing connections between his niece and de Borbula and the family. Attracted to violent activities, de Borbula continued to associate with a variety of radical and paramilitary groups. He also caught the eye of the Secret Service. In 1923, during a bizarre interlude, de Borbula returned to his home in Budapest and aligned himself with a pro-Hitler group. There he authored a paper which attacked Jewish physics and espoused the developing New World Order. Charged with conspiring to overthrow the Hungarian government, he escaped back to America. Throughout this entire period, de Borbula would regularly correspond with Tesla to discuss various ideas he had, such as how to perfect a projector bomb, which he had a patent pending on, and he also discussed his latest encounter with a cabal of international warlords. The following letter suggests the possibility that Tesla's attacking Einstein may have been prompted by anti-Semitic sentiments as much as by philosophical differences. Munitions Incorporated, 295 Madison Avenue, New York, New York. My dear Mr. Tesla, I hugely enjoyed your comments on relativity, which we, way back in 1921, attacked in my Budapest paper as a theory of the fundamentals of which, if logically developed, would inevitably lead to an anthropomorphic Jehovah, with all the evil trimmings in philosophy and social order. Yours sincerely, Titus de Borbula. In full support of Tesla's desire to resurrect a new Wardenclyffe, de Borbula carefully drafted for Tesla blueprints for a 120-foot-tall Teleforce powerhouse and transmission tower. At the same time, he set up a factory for his munitions company in New Jersey with Captain Hans Teuscher. The tower, set up somewhat like a high-tech Van de Graaff generator, with Van de Graaff's primitive cardboard belt replaced by a vacuum stream of ionized air, had at its bulbous apex a turret-rotating particle beam cannon, able to move about to attack planes and airships with information provided by an Earth current radar system the wizard had also designed during his days at Wardenclyffe. Teuscher, a German-American, was closely linked with the fatherland through his daughter, who still lived there. Through this and other channels, Tesla could be introduced to potential weapons buyers. Simultaneously, he could also be supplied with small amounts of dynamite, which he used to test telegeodynamic equipment that he was trying to sell to such companies as Texaco Oil Company for geophysical exploration. Titus de Borbula was now making his living selling rifle grenades, fragmentation and gas bombs and other armaments to both domestic police departments and foreign governments in Europe and South America. Unfortunately for the Hungarian, unwished-for newspaper publicity concerning a lawsuit with Teuscher drew the attention of the Internal Revenue Service, IRS. Having hid his relationship with the munitions factory, de Borbula not only attracted the tax collectors, but also the seemingly omniscient J. Edgar Hoover, who monitored his activities for the next 10 years. He was accused of being a German agent and illegal alien involved in subversive activities, and Hoover recommended that de Bobula be considered for custodial detention in the event of a national emergency. Although they maintained their relationship during this stormy period, Tesla's antennae were raised, especially when de Bobula requested loans from him in amounts you would not miss, just at the time he declared bankruptcy. De Bobula was $750,000 in debt. Hoping to make Tesla a partner in the company, de Bobula raised Tesla's ire when he used his name as a reference when working an arms deal with the Minister of Paraguay. Tesla called de Bobula and stated emphatically that he was not to use the inventor's name. Unable to maintain his Manhattan apartment, de Bobula moved to the Bronx, where he was eventually arrested. A search of his apartment revealed an arsenal of hand grenades, dynamite, and tear gas bombs. The architect claimed they were simply part of the inventory from his company, and he was interrogated and released. Presumably an anti-Semite who apparently had ties to Henry Ford, de Bobula disavowed any relationship to either the Communist Party or the German-American Bund. Although he was monitored throughout the World War II years, the Federal Bureau of Investigation was unable to prove that he had violated any federal statute, and de Bobula was allowed to move to Washington, D.C., where he set up another munitions arsenal right in the heart of the city. In 1949, he wrote directly to J. Edgar Hoover to get them off his back, and apparently Hoover complied, as articles and references to him faded away at that time. As the Great Depression wore on, Tesla's expenses continued to mount. He was now $400 in debt to the hotel, which, during those dreary days, was a considerable sum. Cornered by the management, the sly conceptualist fell back on a stratagem that had worked so well when he was at the Waldorf Astoria. He would live on credit. He thereupon offered as collateral a working model of his death ray, which he told the establishment was worth $10,000. They asked for a receipt in writing, and he agreed. The treacherous device and his note were carefully placed in locker number 103 in the hotel's backroom vault. Although he had solved the problem of meeting the rent, Tesla's finances were still in a precarious state. He was even having trouble coming up with the $15 per month storage costs at the Manhattan storage warehouse. In 1934, with a bitter taste in his mouth, he drafted a long letter to J.P. Morgan, Jr. In it, the inventor revealed that he had made overtures to sell his Chinese Wall of Defense to war departments in America and England. The Russians are very anxious to render their borders safe against Japanese invasion, and I have made them a proposal which is also being seriously considered. The inventor went on to acknowledge his outstanding debt to Morgan from the turbine affair, and his willingness to pay back the sum, about $40,000, and then made an appeal. If I had now $25,000 to secure my property and make convincing demonstrations, I could acquire in a short time colossal wealth. Tesla ended the letter by lambasting FDR's New Deal, which poured out billions in public money just so it can remain in power indefinitely. This perpetual motion scheme, in Tesla's view, was anti-democratic, destructive to established industries, and decidedly socialistic. Needless to say, Morgan did not lend Tesla any money. However, what is interesting in this passage is Tesla's reference to property he needed to secure in order to make convincing demonstrations. This suggestion that he had in fact erected a working death ray would become important later, when the question was raised whether a functioning model had actually been constructed. According to Hugo Gernsback, through to his prompting, the Westinghouse Corporation agreed to help their former champion out. Gernsback stated that he had called up the Westinghouse officials in the late 30s to discuss what could be done. I apprised them of the fact that Tesla was a very proud man who under no circumstances would consider charity. I suggested that perhaps he could be put on the staff in an honorary capacity as a consultant. This was agreed upon, and from that time until his death, Tesla received a modest pension. Gernsback may certainly have called the company. However, his interpretation of what occurred conflicts with the timing of the contract, and the reasons for the deal. Tesla had settled with Westinghouse about 4 years before the science fiction publisher's gracious call. On legal footing, the inventor continued to press his case. Finally, on January 2, 1934, the President, F.A. Merrick, acquiesced and agreed to pay Tesla to act as a consulting engineer for $125 a month for such a period as may be mutually agreeable. To solve the aging patriarch's psychological problem of refusing to pay his rent, Merrick also agreed to cover Tesla's rent. The debt owed to the hotel governor was never settled. Rather, Tesla moved, after signing of the agreement, to the Hotel New Yorker, and there he would live, so far as he was concerned, rent-free to the end of his days. 46. Loose Ends, 1931 to 1943. Then there appeared the vision of a man from a strange new world. A tall, thin man, whose eyes blazed with an unearthly light, entered the room so quietly that one was hardly aware of his presence. He bowed himself to his seat. He beamed upon Viereck and his wife paternally. He greeted the guests with a kindly nod. Before he could be introduced, Tewson blurted out, "Nikola Tesla." Elmer Geertz. The first-time ambassador, Stanko Stojikovich, saw the celebrated Serb. He was standing in front of the library with 2 white pigeons on his arm, pecking seeds from his palm. That was in 1918, and they met only briefly. A decade later, Stojikovich returned to America as an emissary of the Yugoslavian consulate, and they became close friends for the next 10 years. At the age of 90, Stojikovich would recall their visits. As with many other Serbs, Stojikovich was unhappy about the split between Tesla and Pupin, and like others before him, he tried to bring the two men together. Perceiving Pupin as ungrateful and deeply hurt by his association with that donkey, Marconi, Tesla wanted nothing to do with his fellow Serb. The feeling, of course, was mutual. May 29th, 1931. My dear Mr. Sweezy, I have not seen Mr. Tesla for nearly 20 years. In the beginning of the World War, a difference of opinion created a split between Mr. Tesla and myself. Neither he nor I have ever had since that time an opportunity to cure that split. In 1915 I offered through a mutual friend to forgive and forget, but somehow the offer was not accepted. I regret, therefore, that I could not transmit to Mr. Tesla a letter of greeting or congratulation on his 75th birthday. Yours very sincerely, M.J. Pupin. In Dunlap's classic text, Radio's 100 Men of Science, the author writes, Pupin was a man of complete intellectual honesty. If he made an error in an equation on the blackboard, he would quickly admit the mistake, rub out the blunder, and begin again. We have discussed in the past Pupin's insistence that many of Tesla's inventions were his own, and how Pupin removed Tesla's name from the discussion of the history of the AC polyphase system and of the wireless in his 400-page Pulitzer Prize-winning autobiography, which he had dedicated to the rise of idealism as a qualified witness whose testimony had competence and weight. This tack also carried over to his legendary courses at Columbia University, in which he camouflaged Tesla's role in the etiology of a variety of inventions. When Marconi came to New York in 1927 to lecture, Dr. Pupin presided at the Institute of Radio Engineers. Marconi, we love you, said Dr. Pupin. We have come not so much to hear what you have to say, but to see your boyish smile. When Pupin became ill in 1935, he asked his secretary to go and see Stojikovich and plead with him to get Tesla to visit Pupin in the hospital. He wanted to make peace before he passed on. Greeting Stojikovich at the door in his favorite lounging outfit, a red robe with blue slippers, Tesla was taken aback by the request. He said he needed to sleep on the matter. The following day he called his friend and said he would go if Stojikovich would accompany him. In Pupin's room there were a few doctors alongside his bed. The meeting was most touching. Tesla approached the sick man and held his hand out and said, "How are you, my old friend?"
Pupin was speechless from emotion. He cried, and tears were coming down his face. We all went out of the room and left the two men alone. Tesla was able to talk with Pupin eye to eye. In parting, Tesla had mentioned that they would meet again in the science club rooms and converse as before. Immediately after Tesla's visit, Pupin passed away. Tesla attended the funeral. 4 years Tesla's senior, Robert Underwood Johnson, left for a tour of England as a widower in 1927 and went again to France and Italy in 1928. Tesla lent his friend $500 for the trip and $800 for the mortgage on his home. Upon his return in 1929, Johnson joined Tesla and Richmond P. Hobson for a movie and an evening out on the town. Hobson, who was living with his wife Griselda at the Hotel Whalen on 54th Street, also had a residence in the nation's capital. Tesla was seeing his friends on a daily basis at this time. Johnson was particularly lonely, even though he had children and grandchildren who frequently came to visit. The following year, now an octogenarian, the old poet set off again for Europe. On this trip, he was hoping to interview Madame Marie Curie. Although Tesla was able to spend much of the 1930s with Johnson, Hobson left the city after only a short stay to purchase a cattle ranch with his son in Vancouver. In April 1937, Tesla forwarded a new biography of his life that had been translated from Serbo-Croatian into English to Johnson, who passed it on to the editor-in-chief of the New York Times. At 85 years of age, Johnson was too weak to write a thank-you letter in his own hand, but he was able to sign it, R.U. Johnson, Luka Filipov. Both Johnson and Hobson died shortly thereafter. The famous lieutenant, barely 60 years old, was buried in Arlington Cemetery. With the help of Agnes Holden, Robert's daughter, Tesla sent a gorgeous flowering azalea to Griselda, who appreciated greatly the kind thoughts of this dear friend. Another character who stayed friendly with Tesla in the later years was George Sylvester Viereck, wunderkind poet. Viereck was a sensualist, cynic, and German propagandist during World War I and Nazi spokesman during the 1930s and World War II. Tesla's link to Viereck extended back 30 years to when Gilder and Johnson introduced such provocative Viereck poems as The Haunted House in the Century in 1906, which was a poem about an enchanting partner whose body was, alas, a haunted place. When I did yield to passion's swift demand, Viereck penned, one of your lovers touched me with his hand, and in the pang of amorous delight I hear strange voices calling through the night. Viereck, who was probably an illegitimate grandson of Wilhelm II, abdicated Kaiser of Germany, was a multifaceted character and self-proclaimed genius. Having interviewed many of the greatest minds of the epoch, the German-American intellectual had rattled the souls of such individuals as Theodore Roosevelt, George Bernard Shaw, occultist Aleister Crowley, H.G. Wells, Sigmund Freud, Albert Einstein, Kaiser Wilhelm, and Adolf Hitler. A man in intimate contact with his irrational side, Viereck had passed many a day with Sigmund Freud, explicating the great theoretician's libido theory, influencing Freud's writings, and applying the master's psychology to modern life. Freud, Viereck wrote, was motivated not only by a desire to complete his own world-view, but by a belief that each individual represented a special expression of the world spirit. Not an anti-Semite, having, for instance, co-written a series of books with a Jewish professor, Viereck, a lifelong German apologist, was nevertheless somehow able to rationalize the Nazi spiel, and he became an American spokesman for Adolf Hitler. Although Freud saw in this journalistic lion hunter a great mind, he said that Viereck suffered from narcissism, had delusions of persecution, and a fixation on the fatherland. Once Viereck began to rationalize Hitler's rhetoric, Freud saw the journalist as debasing himself, and would not correspond with him any more. During one of the series of interviews Viereck conducted with Tesla, he revealed that Tesla was not a believer in God in the orthodox sense. To me, the universe is simply a great machine which never came into being and never will end. The human being is no exception to the natural order. What we call the soul or spirit is nothing more than the sum of the functionings of the body. When this function ceases, the soul or spirit ceases likewise. According to John O'Neill, this meat-machine theory was really a ruse used to hide the numerous mystical experiences that Tesla had. On his vision of the 21st century, Tesla foresaw a world in which eugenics would be universally established. Perhaps spurred by Vierek's discussion of the Aryan vision or the iniquitous American practice of sterilizing criminals and some mentally retarded individuals, Tesla supported the idea of sterilizing the unfit and deliberately guiding the mating instinct. A century from now, the celibate concluded, it will no more occur to a normal person to mate with a person eugenically unfit than to marry a habitual criminal. On diet, the slim Epicurean revealed that he had given up meat altogether. Tesla believed that in the future inexpensive and healthy food would be derived from milk, honey, and wheat. As the 1930s progressed, the inventor would continue to live on an ever-receding subsistence diet, moving from meat to fish to vegetables, and finally to warm milk, bread, and something he called factor actus. Eliminating solid food altogether, the thinning wizard had concocted a health potion made up of a dozen vegetables, including white leeks, cabbage hearts, flower of cauliflower, white turnips, and lettuce hearts. Although he still maintained that he might live to 140, a psychoanalytic view of this regimen of meagre victuals could only construe it as an anorexic, unconscious plan for self-extinguishment. Long before the next century dawns, the oracle predicted, systematic reforestation and the scientific management of natural resources will have made an end of all devastating droughts, forest fires, and floods. Long-distance transmission of electrical power by harnessing waterfalls will dispense with the necessity of burning fuel. Robots and thinking machines will replace humans, and the trend of spending more on war and less on education will be reversed. A major reason for this would be Tesla's latest discovery of his defensive shield between nations. If no country can be attacked successfully, there can be no purpose in war. My discovery ends the menace of war. I do not say that there may not be several destructive wars before the world accepts my gift. I may not live to see its acceptance. In the habit of meeting with Vierek and his family at their home on Riverside Drive on a somewhat regular basis, Tesla accepted an invitation to attend a dinner party. Present was Vierek's son Peter. Today, as a Pulitzer Prize-winning poet and English professor, Peter remembers Tesla as almost an uncle. Also present was the youthful Elmer Gertz, who at that time was preparing a biography of Vierek. A friend of Carl Sandburg, and also biographer of voluptuary Frank Harris, Gertz would later come to defend such illustrious individuals as Nathan Leopold and Loeb, pornographic writer Henry Miller, and assassin Jack Ruby, in an appeal of the death sentence. At a spry 85 years of age, Gertz remembered the meeting which took place 57 years before, when he was 29. In a communicative mood at the dinner party, Tesla told his life story unostentatiously, simply, with quiet eloquence. He told of his platonic affairs of the heart, explained the inventions that have made the world his debtor, and told of his plans, of his credo, of his foibles. It was a tale of wonders, told with guileless simplicity. Struck by the fact that they were in the same house that had seen Einstein, Sinclair Lewis, and countless others, Gertz noted that Vierek was comparatively silent much of the night, but he was subtly responsible for the intellectual thrills of the evening. Pressed for other details, Gertz revealed that Tesla knew all of Vierek's poems by heart. Tesla also discussed his platonic affair with Sarah Bernhardt, whom he had met while in Paris at the 1889 exposition. Differing with O'Neill's oft-quoted suggestion that Tesla avoided her eyes when he picked up her handkerchief, Gertz said that Tesla had met with her on several occasions, perhaps also in New York. So taken with her was he, that Tesla had saved and preserved her scarf without ever washing it. and still had it to that day. Viereck provides a fascinating link between Tesla and Sigmund Freud, self-denial and eros. Stoyakovich told a story of how he was invited to Tesla's New Yorker apartment, and a valet brought in a bottle of wine in a dish of ice, but Tesla never allowed it to be opened. When this event was replayed another evening, Tesla revealed that he kept the bottle there to prove that he could prevent himself from drinking it. A man of rigid habits, Tesla denied himself certain pleasures as a way to supposedly establish total control over himself. And yet Tesla was a complete slave to his idiosyncrasies and to a cauldron of phobias. Going out of his way to avoid handshakes, displacing his amorous affections onto birds, keeping hotel servants at a distance of at least 3 feet, throwing out collars and gloves after one use, Tesla had other rigid requirements as well. The hotel was requested to keep one table permanently reserved for himself. No one else was allowed to eat there. If a fly landed on the table, it had to be reset and a new plate of food brought forth. When it came to money matters, Tesla also showed little ability to restrain himself, and as we've seen, he habitually refused to honor rent payments. From the Freudian point of view, Tesla was an anal compulsive personality, fixated in the latent stage of sexual repression, with a displacement of his energies into scientific endeavors. By denying his libido, his censor had converted his primal sexual energy into an odd mixture of pre-logical behavior patterns that tended to diffuse, redirect, and sublimate the highly cathectic complexes the inventor wished to deny. It appears quite possible that Viereck strove to psychoanalyze Tesla, to have the inventor dig deep into his childhood in an effort to release submerged events that may have blocked or redirected his life in neurotic fashion. Viereck, who was known to partake of opium tincture, probably entered an altered state when conversing with the ethereal prophet. Nearly 80 years old at the time, exceedingly frail and thin, Tesla wrote Viereck a long letter reviewing the traumas of his childhood. "It was a dismal night, with rain falling in torrents. My brother, a youth of 18 and intellectual giant, had died. My mother came to my room, took me in her arms, and whispered almost inaudibly, 'Come and kiss Dane.' I pressed my mouth against the ice-cold lips of my brother, knowing only that something dreadful had happened. My mother put me again to bed, and lingering a little, said with tears streaming, 'God gave me one at midnight, and at midnight took away the other one.'" Viereck not only wanted Tesla to reactivate the hidden complexes associated with the death of Dane, but also to reflect on the very process of how his fertile mind gave birth to ideas. One can only guess as to whether or not Viereck trod into the realms of Oedipus and Narcissus, dead brother kissing rituals, and Tesla's monastic life of quirks, self-denial, and affection displaced onto feathered friends. In 1937, on his 81st birthday, at a luncheon in his honor, Tesla was bestowed both the Order of the White Lion from the Minister of Czechoslovakia and the Grand Cordon of the White Eagle, the highest order of Yugoslavia, from Regent Prince Paul by order of King Peter. Belgrade also set up an endowment of $600 per month, which they paid to him for the rest of his days. Looking much like an eagle himself, with his long hawk-shaped proboscis accentuated by his extreme leanness, the skeletal inventor followed his annual custom after the award ceremony by playing host to a group of newspaper men at his Hotel New Yorker suite. There, dressed in his finest tuxedo, the wizard read a prepared treatise outlining his latest inventions and plans for contacting nearby planets. Just a few months later, in late autumn, while negotiating with emissaries from the war departments of Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, England, the Soviet Union, and the United States, Tesla was run down by a taxicab. Refusing to see a doctor, the inventor managed to limp home. He stayed in bed on and off for 6 months. He had cracked 3 ribs. Thus, in May 1938, still in the process of recuperation, he declined an invitation to attend another award ceremony at the National Institute of Immigrant Welfare in honor of him, Felix Frankfurter of Harvard Law School, and Giovanni Martinelli of the Metropolitan Opera. Accepting the award in Tesla's honor was Dr. Paul Radosaviljevich, professor of pedagogy at New York University. Rado read a statement from Tesla which apparently verified the famous 1885 Edison story that Edison had laughed off the promised debt to Tesla of $50,000 for redesigning machinery. In 1939, just as World War II was about to start, George Sylvester Viereck set off on a surreptitious journey to the fatherland. There, amid the pageantry of swastikas and the Gestapo, he met yet again with Adolf Hitler and received a communiqué signed by the Führer in his own hand. The date was February the 26th, 1939. Upon his return, Viereck continued his practice of preaching the Nazi line in a variety of publications, writing some articles under an assumed name, interpreting FDR as having a messianic complex, and Hitler as a dynamic genius and a poet of passion, first in war, first in peace, first in the hearts of his countrymen. Viereck was arrested and indicted on 2 counts of seditious conspiracy. It was quickly established that he was on the German payroll, supposedly as a journalist, but obviously as a paid propagandist. Conceited and self-deluded, the bewildered and obtuse philosopher was sent to jail, where he wrote poetry for the next few years. Just as references to Tesla were deleted from engineering texts, Viereck's name was dropped from many anthologies and Who's Who. Thus, both individuals disappeared from history books, but for totally different reasons. As World War II began, Tesla was becoming more feeble, lapsing in and out of states of coherence. During one of his more lucid moments, he wrote, with the help of his nephew, Sava Kosanovich, the foreword to Vice President Henry Wallace's address on the future of the common man for the Serbo-Croatian edition. The essay not only portrays a prophet who envisions a better world in the future, it also portrays the conflict and humiliation he himself suffered in his dealings with the greedy industrialists who capitalized on his inventions with little regard for his well-being, let alone the welfare of mankind as a whole. Out of this war, the greatest since the beginning of history, a new world must be born that would justify the sacrifices offered by humanity, where there will be no humiliation of the poor by the violence of the rich, where the products of intellect, science, and art will serve society for the betterment and beautification of life, and not the individuals for achieving wealth. This new world shall be a world of free men and free nations, equal in dignity and respect. The old man gazed out the window as his nimble fingers unconsciously preened the ruffled feathers of his beloved white pigeon with the brown-tipped wings. Although it was January, a lightning storm rumbled in the distance. "I've done better than that," the wizard mumbled, as the sun peeked through the clouds to reveal the iridescent purples, violets, greens, and reds of the neck feathers of another of the more hardy birds that came to visit. Tesla thought back affectionately to his days as a boy on the farm, rolling down the hill carefree with Mashek, his pet cat. And then his mind swirled with thoughts of violent arguments with Morgan, his unfinished 15-story transmission tower, and his friend Mark Twain, who was now in financial trouble. Requesting funds from Kosanovich, Tesla handed the money to a messenger to deliver to Twain, giving as the address his old laboratory on South Fifth Avenue, a street that no longer existed. Unable to locate the deceased writer, the boy returned to Tesla, but his explanation was ignored. The old man told the boy to keep the money if he could not deliver it. Having neglected to pay the rent on his belongings held at Manhattan Storage, the wizard had managed somehow to mail out a check for $500 to a Serbian church fundraising event held in Gary, Indiana. G.J. Weilich, manager of Manhattan Storage, threatened to put the lot up for auction. The outstanding bill was $297. Perhaps too disillusioned to care, Tesla ignored the last warning, and Weilich made good on his promise, placing an announcement in the local papers. Noticing the advertisement, Jack O'Neill rushed to contact Tesla's nephew, Sava Kasanovic, who was now the Yugoslavian ambassador stationed in New York. Kasanovic covered the debt and continued to make the carrying charge, $15 per month, saving this invaluable legacy from tragic dismantlement. "One night," Tesla wrote, "as I was lying in bed in the dark, solving problems as usual, my beloved pigeon flew through the open window and stood on my desk. As I looked at her, I knew she wanted to tell me she was dying. And then, as I got her message, there came a light from her eyes, powerful beams of light. When that pigeon died, something went out of my life. I knew that my life's work was finished." Lingering at the abyss throughout the beginning years of World War II, Tesla continued to lead his dual life, meeting with friends and dignitaries whenever possible, and lending out his secret papers to mysterious men. A few months later, he was dead. The date was January the 7th, 1943. He was 86 years old. 2,000 are present at Tesla's funeral. Great in science attend. The President and I are deeply sorry to hear of the death of Mr. Nikola Tesla. We are grateful for his contribution to science and industry and to this country. Eleanor Roosevelt. The funeral service was held in Serbian in the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. With the coffin open, the sermon for the dead was conducted by the Venerable Reverend Dusan Shuklatovic, rector of the Serb Orthodox Church of St. Sava. Over the radio, New York Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia read a moving eulogy written by Croatian author Louis Adamic as a long line of mourners filed past. The list of honorary pallbearers included Dr. Ernest Alexanderson of GE, who gained his wealth and fame from inventing a powerful high-frequency transmitter. Dr. Harvey Rentschler, director of the research laboratories of Westinghouse. Edwin Armstrong, father of FM radio. Consul General D.M. Stanojevic of Yugoslavia. William Barton, curator of the Hayden Planetarium, where Tesla often went to meditate. And Gano Dunn, president of J.G. White Engineering, and Tesla's assistant a half-century before, during his paradigm-shifting experiments delivered just a few blocks away at Columbia University. We cannot know, but it may be that a long time from now, when patterns are changed, the critics will take a view of history, Hugo Gernsback wrote propitiously in his magazine. They will bracket Tesla with Da Vinci or with our own Mr. Franklin. One thing is sure, Gernsback concluded. The world as we run it today did not appreciate his peculiar greatness. Colonel David Sarnoff, president of RCA, also took the soapbox on Tesla's behalf. Nikola Tesla's achievements in electrical science are monuments that symbolize America as a land of freedom and opportunity. His novel ideas of getting the ether in vibration put him on the frontier of wireless. Tesla's mind was a human dynamo that whirled to benefit mankind. Edwin Armstrong, who was about to sue Sarnoff and RCA for infringing his FM patents, helped place Tesla in the proper historical perspective when he said, "Who today can read a copy of the inventions, researches, and writings of Nikola Tesla published before the turn of the century without being fascinated by the beauty of the experiments described and struck with admiration for Tesla's extraordinary insight into the nature of the phenomena with which he was dealing? Who now can realize the difficulties he must have had to overcome in those early days? But one can imagine the inspirational effect of the book 40 years ago on a boy about to decide to study the electrical art. Its effect was both profound and decisive. On September the 25th, 1943, just 9 months after Tesla's death, the Bethlehem Fairfield shipyards near Baltimore launched the USS Nikola Tesla, a 10,000-ton Liberty ship. Sponsors at the ceremony included a number of Croats, such as Louis Adamic and violinist Slatko Balakovic, and also Serbs such as Tesla's nephews, Sava Kozanovich, and Nicholas Terbayevich. The New York Sun editorialized, "Mr. Tesla was 86 years old when he died. He died alone. He was an eccentric, whatever that means, a nonconformist possibly. At any rate, he would leave his experiments and go for a time to feed the silly and inconsequential pigeons in Herald Square. He delighted in talking nonsense. Or was it? Granting that he was a difficult man to deal with, and that sometimes his predictions would affront the ordinary human's intelligence, here still was an extraordinary man of genius. He must have been. He was seeing a glimpse into that confused and mysterious frontier which divides the known and the unknown. But today we do know that Tesla, the ostensibly foolish old gentleman, at times was trying with superb intelligence to find the answers. His guesses were right so often that he would be frightening. Probably we shall appreciate him better a few million years from now. 47. The FBI and the Tesla Papers, 1943 to 1956. War Department, Military Intelligence Service. 22nd of January, 1946. Alien Property Custodian. Dear Sir, this office is in receipt of a communication from Headquarters, Air Technical Service Command, Wright Field, requesting that we ascertain the whereabouts of the files of the late scientist Dr. Nikola Tesla, which may contain data of great value to the above headquarters. In view of the extreme importance of those files, we would like to request also that we be advised of any attempt by any other agency to obtain them. Sincerely yours, Colonel Ralph E. Doty, Chief Washington Branch. After Tesla's death, the FBI, the Office of Alien Property, OAP, and factions of the War Department conspired to impound and protect the Tesla secret weaponry papers. The United States was in the midst of a world war, and Tesla's ties to arms merchants, communists through his Yugoslavian nephew, and a notorious German propagandist all helped prompt the covert agencies to safeguard this material until it was properly analyzed. A half-century later, they have yet to release it. Raised to the level of a national hero within the Slavic countries, Tesla was considered practically of royal stock. Thus his nephew, Sava Kozanovich, rose to become a representative of the newly forming Yugoslavia Republic at the Eastern European Planning Board, which met in Czechoslovakia. Kozanovich, like Tesla, wanted a unified country, but their orientations were different. In 1941, the Nazis continued their policy of intimidation and deception by trying to force a treaty with King Peter of Yugoslavia. Backed by the people, Peter refused to agree to an alliance, and therefore suffered a fatal blow when Germany masterminded a brutal invasion involving troops from Bulgaria, Italy, and Hungary, and also 300 Luftwaffe bombers. Professor Michael Markovic of Long Island University, a Serb living in Croatia during World War II, has said that 90,000 Serbs were killed by the Croats. And when I inquired why, he said, because the Croats were fascists. That is, because they had aligned themselves with the Nazis. As a youth in midst of the war, Markovic had watched the bodies float down the river. When asked why he survived, his reply was sheer luck. Concerning the Tesla mythology, Markovic said that ever since he was a child, he was aware that Tesla was considered a great national hero. Years later, as Hitler's invasion became imminent, Markovic and his countrymen had expected Tesla himself to return to Belgrade and shield it from the Nazis by harnessing his impenetrable death shield. Unfortunately, Tesla never came. Kozanovich was not as romantic a figure, and although a Serb, he abandoned the exiled king in order to back the rising Croat leader Joseph Tito, Josip Broz, and his communist doctrine. Tito was a solid choice. Although he was an ally of the Soviets, he was able to maintain autonomy. He also sought to unify the warring factions. His marriage to a Serbian woman was a powerful symbol in advancing this goal. Since the Soviet Union was an ally,
Kozanovich, as a Yugoslavian ambassador, was able to travel freely to America to discuss various diplomatic tactics with the new leadership. Thus, during the course of World War II, he was able to attend to his ailing uncle in New York and also try to finalize plans to set up a museum in Belgrade in order to honor the great inventor. In 1942, Tesla became more seriously ill and suffered from palpitations and fainting spells. Although Tesla's true commitment was to the young exiled King Peter, Tesla's nephew was able to coax the inventor into sending a message to Tito which preached unification between Serbs and Croats. Kozanovich also admitted shielding Tesla from factions of the Serbian royalty at the same time. However, when Peter arrived in New York City, he actively helped arrange a meeting between Tesla and the king. Having unsuccessfully talked with Churchill in England and Roosevelt in Washington, both of whom were reluctantly backing Tito, King Peter was at least consoled by Eleanor Roosevelt, who attended a large party in his honor at the Colony Club in New York. Organized by the American Friends of Yugoslavia, the King's mother, Queen Marie, and also Anne Morgan, Pierpont's daughter, attended, but Tesla was too ill to come. Therefore, King Peter, with Kozanovich, took a cab to the Hotel New Yorker to confer with the virtual patriarch of his country. Shocked by Tesla's cadaverous condition and upset by the terrible chain of events in his country, Peter told the inventor that he had hoped that he could have returned to Yugoslavia to free it from the Nazis. In his diaries, Peter also revealed that he and Tesla wept together for all the sorrows that had torn apart their homeland. A few months later, Tesla was dead. A maid discovered his body on January 8, 1943. While Hugo Gernsback rushed to make a death mask, Kenneth Sweezy, Sava Kozanovich, and George Clark, director of a museum and laboratory at RCA, entered the apartment. With the locksmith and the hotel management present, they removed various documents from the inventor's safe. Although the FBI alleged that valuable papers, electrical formulas, designs, etc. were taken, the hotel management confirmed that Kozanovich removed only 3 pictures, and Sweezy took the 1931 testimonial autograph book created for the commemoration of Tesla's 75th birthday. These events were monitored by the ubiquitous surveillance mastermind J. Edgar Hoover, hardline anti-communist and protector of American interests. Hoover wrote in a memorandum under the heading Espionage that he feared that Kozanovich, as heir to the Tesla estate, might make certain material available to the enemy. Kozanovich had been identified as a member of the Eastern European Planning Board, but because of the complicated condition of the Balkan states, there was essentially no way for Hoover to ascertain exactly where Kozanovich's alliances rested. He could have been affiliated with King Peter, the communist Tito, fascist factions associated with Mussolini, Hitler, the Soviet Union, or none of the above. Consistent with his suspicious nature, Hoover also questioned Tesla's sympathies, even though the inventor was friends with Vice President Henry Wallace and Franklin Roosevelt through letters to his wife Eleanor. One of the main reasons for Hoover's concerns was Tesla's address before the Friends of Soviet Russia, which he gave at the Grange Hall in Springfield, Massachusetts, in 1922. On January 8th, Abraham N. Sparnell, the 42-year-old president of the International Latex Corporation of Dover, Delaware, now Playtex, who was residing in New York City, had called FBI agent Frederick Cornells to discuss Tesla's death ray experiments. As the inventor had just died, Sparnell feared that Kozanovich would obtain the pertinent papers and pass them to the Soviets. Sparnell had already begun to make a name for himself in media and military circles by having invented floating pontoon stretchers for soldiers wounded in amphibious landings, and by turning back the million-dollar profits to the government for the war effort. Born in Odessa in 1901, Sparnell would later become a vociferous anti-communist who spent upward of $8 million throughout the 1940s and 1950s buying space in the United States press to reprint articles that would contribute to an understanding of world problems. Having fled to France in 1905 to escape the anti-Semitic pogroms of Russia with his family, as a child Sparnell, at the age of 7, came to the United States in 1908. A graduate of the University of Rochester,
Sparnell had invented electrical appliances and pneumatic products in the early 1920s, before starting the International Latex Corporation in 1929. Realizing the potential importance of the Tesla invention in the democratic fight for world supremacy, Sparnell had contacted Dr. D. Lozado, advisor to Vice President Wallace, and a Mr. Bopkin of the Department of Justice. Bopkin agreed to contact J. Edgar Hoover regarding the affair, and Lozado conferred with Wallace and perhaps even FDR, calling Sparnell back shortly after their conversation to convey that the government was vitally interested in Tesla's papers. Sparnell had also contacted one Blois Fitzgerald, whom the FBI had pegged as an electrical engineer who was a protege of Tesla's, who had also called Cornell's. Having met Fitzgerald at an engineering meeting a few years earlier, Sparnell became highly interested in the Tesla weapon, possibly hoping to become involved in a profitable business developing the death beam device for the U.S. military. Fitzgerald, still in his 20s, had been in postal communication with Tesla since the late 1930s. He had called the inventor on his birthday in 1938 to congratulate him, and continued this practice for the next 4 years. In 1939, Fitzgerald tried to meet Tesla, but it appears that he didn't do so at that time. Just 2 weeks prior to Tesla's death, Fitzgerald proposed another meeting. It may have taken place. He was working at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology with Professors Keenan, Woodruff, and Kay in the solution of certain problems regarding the dissipation of energy from rapid-fire weapons, and desired to discuss his radiation problem with the elderly inventor. It is plausible that at this delicate time Fitzgerald was able to borrow the various papers in which he was interested. Coincidentally, Tesla had declared that efforts had been made to steal the invention. My room had been entered and my papers examined, but the spies left empty-handed. Fitzgerald, who also worked for the Ordnance Department of the U.S. Army, later told Cornell's that he knows that the complete plans, specifications, and explanations of the basic theories of these things are someplace in the personal effects of Tesla, and that there is a working model of the death ray which cost more than $10,000 to build in a safety deposit box of Tesla's at the Governor Clinton Hotel. To corroborate this story, another acquaintance of Tesla's, Charles Hausler, a hired hand who took care of the inventor's pigeons, later said that Tesla had a large box of container in his room near the pigeon cages. He told me to be very careful not to disturb the box, as it contained something that could destroy an airplane in the sky, and he had hopes for presenting it to the world. Hausler also added that the device was later stored in the basement of a hotel. Fitzgerald reported that Tesla had claimed that he had 80 trunks in different locations in the city containing inventions, manuscripts, and plans of his various work. The young engineer reiterated the need for the government to obtain the Tesla papers for use in war. He was also worried about the loyalty and patriotism to the Allied nations of Sava Kozanovich and another nephew, Nicholas Terbayevich. During these same days, Cornell's overseer, D.E. Foxworth, an assistant director of the FBI, assured those concerned that this matter would be properly handled, that Tesla's nephew, who is his heir, would not be able to send the papers to the Axis powers. On the 11th, yet another FBI agent, T.J. Donegan, brought up the possibility that the New York District Attorney could have Kozanovich and Sweezy picked up discreetly on a burglary charge. However, this was not done. 3 days later, Donegan notified Hoover that the situation was being handled as an enemy custodian matter, and therefore we should take no further action. Office of Alien Property. What happened appears to be this. The FBI attempted to remove themselves from the responsibility in the Tesla case, thereby allowing the OAP to take charge. Nevertheless, because of the FBI's initial involvement, numerous people contacted them through the years in attempts to gain access to the Tesla estate. The OAP questioned the legality of their own jurisdiction, since Tesla was a naturalized citizen. However, as Kozanovich was probably legally entitled to his uncle's estate, the OAP had justification in considering the material alien property.
According to Irving Juro, who was the attorney assigned to the Tesla case at the time of his death, the activities of the OAP were not only not illegal, it was the only government agency with statutory power to seize enemy assets without court order. Because of this unique jurisdiction, it was the OAP, and only the OAP, that maintained legal control over the papers until they were released 10 years later. Naturally, both real and imagined concerns involving the war situation were the key factors influencing what, to the uninformed, appeared to be an illegal action. The Germans still controlled a large part of Europe, and the outcome of the war was by no means determined in January 1943. Rumours that the enemy was also developing an ultimate weapon were also well-founded. Walter Gorsuch, alien property custodian, thereupon ordered all of Tesla's belongings, including the safe from his apartment and other holdings in the basement of the New Yorker, shipped to where Tesla's other possessions were, Manhattan storage. Gorsuch, however, was out of the office the day Tesla's body was discovered, and it was the young attorney Irving Juro who handled the case. At about noon on Saturday, January 9th, Juro recalled 50 years later, I was ordered by telephone from the Washington office not to close up shop, but to wait for further instructions. I was informed that a Nikola Tesla had just died, that he was reputed to have invented and in the possession of a death ray, a significant military device capable of destroying incoming warplanes, presumably Japanese, on the west coast, by projecting a beam into the skies and creating a field of energy which would cause the planes to disintegrate. Moreover, it was suspected that German enemy agents were in hot pursuit to locate the device or the plans for its production. With orders to impound all of Tesla's belongings, Juro was also instructed to visit other hotels where Tesla had resided and to take similar action. Juro was accompanied by 4 individuals from the Office of Naval Intelligence, Army Intelligence, and the FBI. Arriving at the Hotel New Yorker, we learned that Tesla had been found dead by the service maid. We were told that he was laid out in his bed with only a pair of stockings on. The officials were also told that Kozanovich had been in the room and had removed 3 photographs. The military officers were concerned about the death ray model, but I was the only one who had authority. Taking a taxi, Juro and the others visited each of the hotels, which included the St. Regis, the Waldorf Astoria, and the Governor Clinton, and they also visited Manhattan storage. Tesla's possessions were impounded there, and the safe deposit box at the Governor Clinton was also impounded. With Walter Gorsuch, Juro went to visit Ambassador Kozanovich at his hotel on Central Park South, where they apparently also met Nikola Terbayevich, Tesla's other nephew, and an elderly lady who did not speak English. Gorsuch and Juro saw the photos on a table and left. I was told later, Juro recalled, probably through the staff of the OAP, that Tesla's trunks contained mostly newspapers and birdseed, and that the safe deposit box contained a model of some type of device. Whether the death ray or not is not clear. It was also rumored that the Soviet Union had offered Tesla $50 million to come to the USSR and work on his death ray, but he refused. As Juro had never heard of Tesla before January the 8th, 1943, he saw the inventor as a deadbeat because he didn't pay his hotel bills. He may have been disturbed because he spent so much time feeding pigeons, Juro said. But the story was too strange and too incomplete for him, so he called the Westinghouse people to try to verify who Tesla was. They were ecstatic, Juro recalled. They said that without Tesla, there would have been no Westinghouse. The Manhattan storage inventory did not mention the birdseed, which had played so prominently in Juro's memory. Possessions listed included 12 locked metal boxes, 1 steel cabinet, 35 metal cans, 5 barrels, and 8 trunks. Gorsuch also ordered the large hotel box at the Hotel Governor Clinton, held for over 10 years as security for unpaid bills sealed. Jack O'Neill's papers were also confiscated, although they were probably returned to him, for he was able to publish his extensive biography a year later. Although Kozanovich assured O'Neill that there was no reason to worry and that the OAP
conveyed full rights to the Tesla papers to him. In fact, Kozanovich was highly concerned. He hired Philip Wittenberg from Wittenberg, Carrington and Farnsworth to protect his interest. Although the lawyer pleaded the case, the government countered with advice from the War Policies Unit of the Department of Justice. They ruled that Kozanovich could not touch the estate. This edict was maintained throughout the 1940s. Tesla's secret weaponry papers were scrutinized by various divisions of the military, although the nephew was given the combination to the safe and